located in Washington, D.C., but all of us are coming in from all different places, meeting both on the Zoom platform, but also being live streamed through YouTube. So if you are taking a look through YouTube, if you're participating that way, we do have representatives from Metropolitan who are actually on the lookout for y'all. So we'll be using the chat within the Zoom function, but if you want to participate with your comments and perspectives or questions, feel free to place those in the YouTube platform, and our Metropolitan folks will make sure that it gets here so that we can include you in the participatory function of our time together. Digitally, we can only do so much, but we're doing what we can. And so we're excited to be able to be amongst each other, but be amongst folks across platforms the best we can. So welcome. We are looking through the biblical text of 1 Samuel. We're kind of hanging out in 1 Samuel, but we're also looking at the book Holy Imagination by Reverend Dr. Judy Fentress Williams. I've said this a whole bunch of times, but I'll keep saying it. This book is wonderful. As somebody who has been through seminary, I think every seminary student should be using this book. It's a wonderful beginning to end, Genesis to Revelation book, theological take on the biblical text that asks, if we use our holy imagination, how does the text come alive for us while also staying incredibly faithful to the text? Sometimes when we use our holy imaginations, we're so far over here that we're not talking about the text anymore. And sometimes we're so close to the text that we're no longer talking about our contemporary context. And this book, I believe, and others believe, is a wonderful way to tap into how contemporary folk like us can take a look at a sacred text that was written so long ago, and be faithful to both the text and ourselves, and hopefully, prayerfully, to who God has called us and created us to be. So that's a little kind of overshoot of our time together. Our time today will focus on, so let me back up a little bit. Sometimes what we do is we kind of come in with an interpretive question, like let's start with this question, kind of open it up, and then we bounce back and forth between the biblical text and the Holy Imagination book, right? Sometimes, the last couple of times actually, we've started right in the biblical text and just read a section of the biblical text and allowed that to move us back and forth between the book and our own perspectives and our experiences, and betted it around that way. Today, for a couple of different reasons, I think we'll start with the Holy Imagination book. So if you don't have it, do not worry, because I'm going to ask for some volunteers to read from the Holy Imagination book. So if you have the Holy Imagination book and you would like to participate in some reading, that would be phenomenal. We're going to start with, in the Holy Imagination book, we're going to be working from pages 97 to 100, 97 to 100. So one of the reasons, like this is, I'm not trying to trick anybody with my pedagogy, right? Like, I'm not trying to pull the rug out or something. I don't mind talking about like why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think that adds to our conversation, right? One of the reasons is logistics. We only have a certain amount of time together. The work in the Holy Imagination book is 3 pages. The work that it reflects or that it points to in the biblical text is like 9 chapters at least of 1 Samuel. So it's easier logistically for us to go this way. It's an equally faithful way, right? But sometimes we make the decision based on logistics, and that's what I'm doing. So
what's the title? I'm on my tablet. I have the book on my tablet, so I don't have pages. Tell me what the title is.
Yes, ma'am. We are in chapter 9, and the title is Saul, CA 1030 to 1000 BCE.
Got it. Thank you.
Excellent. Awesome. So
Reverend
would somebody, yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, last week you said we were going to pick up Hannah's song for the
Uh-oh.
noon group.
Yes. And that, I know we were joking around about it, but was the overarching sense that I was going to come back with particular information? Because if it was, I can let you know that based on my week, that did not happen. Now, that's not to say that I can't pick that thing up, right? It's just, this is another logistics thing. So I deeply apologize, but let's just run back to Hannah's song quickly. Yes, on page 94, Sister Joan, this is just the section right before the characterization in Samuel. Wait, am I in the wrong one? All right, you know what? Let's start with Hannah's song. We're in the Holy Imagination book. We'll start with Hannah's song. Would somebody read page 94? Starting with Hannah's song. Thank you for keeping me on track. Who did that? Who was that? That was Brother Carlos. Thank you.
Okay. Hannah's song. Hannah's song follows the birth narrative in chapter 1. Poetry following prose, connection to Magnificat, dynamic of reversals sets the stage for the Samuel narrative arc, women as prophets in Samuel/Kings. Should I continue?
Please do.
Yes. Hannah's song, which follows the instructional allegory, lays the foundation for the rest of Samuel. In her psalm of praise, Hannah sets up a series of reversals, rejoicing in God's ability to strengthen the feeble and take down the mighty. The barren one has 7 children, in contrast to the mother of many sons who lost them all. The Lord lifts up the needy and brings down the lonely. The song concludes with the words, "The Lord, he judges the far corners of the earth. May God give strength to his king and raise high the strength of his anointed one." Continue?
Yes, please. All the way to the end.
Okay. Hannah's song refers to a king, the anointed Messiah, when there is none. Clearly, the song is proleptic, anticipating the monarchy and reminding the people that when there is a king, it is the Lord who will judge the far corners of the earth. It also speaks to those in other locations and times who find themselves at the bottom of the hierarchy. The song reminds them that in that future, God will lift them up and bring down their oppressors. The dynamic of reversals shapes the stories of Eli, Samuel, Saul, David, and Solomon. They, like the people of Israel, are raised up by God only to be brought down low for their disobedience.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sister Janine. So when we were talking about 1 Samuel last week, when we talked about how the Holy Imagination book was bringing about, this was on page 89. This is the beginning, the introductory part of part 5, that talked about how the editors of the Deuteronomistic history also knew how their stories would end. Just like she brings up the Titanic, right? The movie Titanic starts with the sinking of the ship. You already know what's going to happen. Then it rolls all the way back and then fills in the story for the movie, right? That leads up back to the end, right? Dr. Fentress Williams is laying this out in a similar way, saying that Samuel and Kings, when the Deuteronomistic historian is putting this together literarily and theologically and politically, they already know that there's a king, right? That there's this series of kings. What they're doing is they're saying, how in the world did we go from a people who were set apart by God, who just followed God, right? Then through Moses and through, right? but it was like people in God, and then all of a sudden, like there's a bunch of kings. How did that happen? And how could it possibly be that these folks are still faithful? How are we still set apart people if now we've got mediaries in between? Like we've got a king, like everybody else got a king. So how is it possible that we're right? So now we've got Hannah's song. And Dr. Fentress Williams is now bringing forward that this song is she says, clearly the song is proleptic, anticipating the monarchy and reminding the people that when there is a king, it is the Lord who will judge the far corners of the earth. So how is it possible, right? Sometimes we might say like two different theologians are coming at it, you know, like that one is saying this and one is saying this. This is the same theologian talking about the books as a whole and then talking about Hannah's song. How is that possible? Let's get that out on the table first, and then we'll dig in a little bit.
Who's reading?
There is no reading. I'm just asking a question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. How is it possible that Dr. Fentress Williams, in the beginning of this section, part 5 or whatever it is, says that the historian the writer, right, the historian, who's based in the Deuteronomy history and theology, already knows that there's a set of kings. They already know that the kingship happens. So what they're doing is they're writing, they're backing up, and they're filling in the story, right? Here, for Hannah's song, the same theologian is saying it's proleptic because the king hasn't happened yet. So they're saying, hey, when a king comes, just know it's still the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going on there? How is it possible that she's able to do both of those things and stay faithful to the text?
Well, actually, that's kind of what we're discussing. It really is a literary device. And I'm remembering one of the books I will never forget is a book by Truman Capote, In Cold Blood. And he starts the book by saying, 24 hours before the Clutters were killed. And then he went on to describe what happened.
Mm-hmm.
This is also true, it's sort of in Where the Crawdads Sing. Remember we talked about that just before I left for Oregon. By the way, I've read that book. And it's someone where the murder has been committed. You know somebody is dead, but you don't know anything else. Mm-hmm. So it's a way, I don't know, just to sort of get your attention.
Yeah, right. So the historian is using a literary device, right? Yeah. So when Dr. Fentress Williams introduces the Titanic movie in the beginning, she's making that very clear connection. This is a way that storytellers tell stories. It doesn't mean that it's not true, right? It's just a way you can tell a story like the beginning, middle, the end. You can start in the middle and people are like, what? Right? And they're like, where's anything going? And it feels all chaotic and stuff because you're coming in the middle. And then it's like, you get this little thing and it's like 4 days earlier, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, okay. That's why I don't understand what anything is going on, right? Mm-hmm. There's all different ways to tell stories. Preachers do the same thing. Right now, I mean, I guess there are some preachers that preach the same way over and over and over again, but there are multiple ways to preach. There are multiple pathways that folks can take. Sometimes folks start with a story. Sometimes folks start with the text. Sometimes folks start with am I the only one who's ever thought of blah, 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 right? And then depending on the church traditions, you have even more specific kind of tropes that folks will use based on the tradition, right? So yes, Sister Janine, you're right on target. This is a literary device that the Deuteronomistic historian is using to help the people understand, like the first readers or the first hearers, Like, this is a way we can understand what's going on. Like, look at what's going on outside, right? Just like we do. Look what's going on outside. How in the world did we get here? And this is providing one way to understand that. Now, we have what could be seen as a complication, right? How is it that when we get to Hannah's song in chapter 1, how is it that this is proleptic? If the writers already know the end and they're using that as a literary device, how is it possible that this song could be proleptic? Could be kind of prophetically saying the king is showing up. It's like a logic problem, you know? Because I mean, otherwise we could say like, she just had a bad taco that day. And so when she went to write about Hannah's, I mean, that's probably not likely, right? When she went to write about Hannah's song, she forgot what she wrote over there. Okay, so what if Hannah's song is a way of talking about it as the experience was happening, right? So the books overall, the book of 1 Samuel overall, the writer knows that the kings are going to happen, right? And is going back and is saying, now we're going to fill in the story. We're looking at it from the narrator's point of view or the writer's point of view. Now, when we're in it, Hannah's song shows up as the player's perspective, the character's perspectives, right? The perspectives of the people is, we don't have this yet because Hannah is pregnant with the prophet that's going to talk about the king, right? Hannah's not even pregnant with the king. Hannah's pregnant with the prophet. So in real time of the story, right? If you're looking at it through the lens of the characters, of the players in the story, then it is proleptic because it hasn't happened yet. So when we look at it from the perspective of the narrator or the writer, we know it's already happened yet. But now the writer is asking us to take the journey. So just like in the movie Titanic, we're the narrator, we would be the narrator when we see the Titanic go down first, right? We already know the end because we're the narrator and we know the whole story. But then in the movie, it takes us back and now we follow the story through whatever the main woman's name is and the dudes and whoever else, right? I don't know the movie that well, obviously. I know there's like a door at the end. But anyway, like the story is being told through the perspective of the characters at that point. In the same way, this is Dr. Fentress Williams is asking us to flip, right? We're flipping from the perspective of the narrator to the perspective of the characters. It's important to name that because when we're doing interpretation, sometimes what happens is we'll be talking about the same piece of text, but we'll be talking about it from different perspectives, right? So this is why we can have conversations about biblical text and somebody's talking about it as if the text is prophetic and somebody's talking about it as if the text is historic and somebody's talking about it as if it's theological, right? But nobody's saying that explicitly. So you end up having 14 conversations at the same time. What do y'all think about that? I mean, does that ring true for anybody or are there critiques of that? What do you think?
So what you're saying is that Hannah was actually a prophet. That not only did God use her to bring Samuel, but he used her to prophesy.
Exactly. If she is offering this song before any of these things are happening, then she is prophesying that she's naming it as if it's already happened. And I think that's why our theologian, Dr. Fentress Williams, I think that's why she's saying women as prophets in Samuel Kings, right? On page 94. She's highlighting that for us so that we can see, even though this book is named for a man, that there are women, major women players going on, doing major things. So even though it's not called First Hannah, or the book of Hannah, she's doing some significant things, as significant as any of the judges were doing, certainly. Anything else y'all are thinking about that?
Well, that kind of figures into then the Magnificat and Mary's proclamation.
Yeah, because she's using a trope, right? And she's not only is it because at the point where Mary's Magnificat shows up, Hannah's song is already in the world, right? It's in the literature, it's in the story, it's in the work of the people at that point. So when she's saying those things, they wouldn't be brand new. They would be referencing back to something folks are hearing, right? And in that way, when we eventually get to the Magnificat, it would be interesting to think about like, I wonder what the folks, like, where they were like, oh my gosh, this is just like Hannah, right? I wonder what this is going to be like, because remember what happened with Hannah, right? And similar to the way when we hear, like, just real quick, like unmute and talk about, just name like a song that you hear in church, or otherwise it doesn't even have to be in church, but it references back like a particular time in your life where it's just like every time you hear that song, you think of that particular thing. Anybody?
September.
Who said that? Who said that?
September.
I did.
Oh,
Earth, Wind, and Fire, September.
Brother Thomas, thank you so much.
I didn't hear what you said, Thomas. What did it remind you of?
No, the name of the song is September.
Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. I'm not going to put you on the spot and be like, what does it remind you of?
It reminds me of a time during my early adulthood.
Yeah, nice.
And, time
Excellent.
and place, events.
Yeah, excellent. Would you mind if I shared what that song brings back for me? Would
Please
that be
do.
okay with you?
Yeah.
September is my very first favorite song ever. Like I was maybe like, oh, well, this is like an age thing. Sorry. I was like 4 or 5 years old. I heard it on the radio and I was like, I love this song. It was like, I just wanted to hear it all the time. It was like the very first time in my life that I remember thinking, this is my favorite song. And so forevermore, like when I hear that song, forevermore, and like, it doesn't matter how much time has gone by, I love that song. Thank you so much for reminding me of that, Brother Thomas, and sharing your own.
Well, it's also my birth month. And it happens to be really my favorite time of the year because of the season and just the way that the weather is during that time.
It is.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. That's wonderful. Anybody else want to share before we move forward?
Well, I like let every mortal keep silence with fear and trembling. Remember, Christ the Lord created you, or something. It's really like a Gregorian chant.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of it, I realize how much we really do not understand what God is doing for us. That another way of saying is life is really a mystery. It really is a mystery. And that's what you know, that's what
Yeah.
the song
And
from a religious point of view.
And these, even the way that these songs point beyond themselves, right? The writers of these songs weren't thinking, you know what, in 2022, some folks are going to be sitting around talking about blah, blah, blah song, right? I mean, they may have had some understanding of what they thought it did or might do, right? But they weren't thinking of all the different ways that it might touch us. In the same way, Hannah's song and the Magnificat come through time, beyond time, across time, and point us to different things. So Hannah's song is helping the people get ready in a certain way, right? Get ready for what's coming. And in the Magnificat, similar themes are being brought forward that folks who knew of Hannah's song and were making those connections could be like, huh, well, here's what happened when Hannah said that song. And now we've got Mary offering this prayer. I wonder what's coming now, right? Like these are, and especially because in those narratives, the expectation is that something brand new is happening. So it's like, remember this other stuff? There are these connections. However, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so Dr. Bowling says, Lauren, right? Okay, excellent. I was like, are you thinking about Lauryn Hill? Yes. Dr. Bowling, do you want to jump in about that?
I just like that. I like the film, but I also like Lauren singing that and going to the hip hop version of it. It just really sparked, and the competition between the choirs that they had, and they're disrobing, taking everything off, and just being themselves and singing that song. Every time I hear it, it makes me feel good.
That's nice. That's nice. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so great. All right. We have, okay, so Hannah's song is setting forth a bridge into what First Samuel is going to start bringing about, right? How this is the bridge between we don't have a king and we're gearing up for a king. Then we move into the book of First Samuel and things start moving right along. We've got Samuel as a birth narrative. We have the birth narrative of Samuel. And so who can say a little something about that? Like, what's the big deal about Samuel? Yes.
Hannah had prayed for a child for many years. She was barren. And although her husband loved her a lot and had another wife who did have children, every time they went up to the, I call it Mecca, to Shiloh, then she would always be praying for a child. And Eli, the priest, thought that she was drunk. I mean, she was just mumbling to herself, but she was really praying. He saw her lips moving, and she told him that she was not drunk, that she was praying for a child, and then he sent her away saying, God will answer your prayer. And she had prayed that if God gave her a son, she would give the child back to God. And ultimately, she had a baby, and she kept the baby until it was weaned, and then she took it back to the priest, to Eli, gave it back to God.
Excellent. And last week we talked about, we didn't come to any conclusion on it. We'd have to do a little more study about it, but there was brought forward how in her first proclamation to God, it's like, if you do this miracle for me, I will give you back the child. After she weans the child and then does bring the child back to the temple, says, I'm lending you my child, right? And we had this conversation about whether or not that was significant. And again, we haven't done the deeper research that would be needed about the original wording and if there's a move there. But we talked about how it could be possible, if we use our holy imaginations, that after spending that much time with the child and weaning the child and connecting with the child in that way, it could be possible that at first it was, if you do this miracle for me, I will give it right back as a sacrificial offering. Because I know the greatness of this miracle. Yet it becomes much more personal for her once the time actually comes. It's no longer just this kind of like miracle, this like miracle that's out there that hasn't happened, that will change her status, that will change her value within society, that will change her status forever, right? She is no longer barren because she has had one child at least, right? But by the time she gets to the place where she has weaned the child, it's no longer just this kind of miracle that's out there, right? There's a connection there, and perhaps that's why the language changes, but that could be for further study. So in any of your reading that you did coming up to this week, what's one of the big stories that comes up about Eli and Samuel? Because Samuel goes to the temple and then is raised at the temple. And there's this kind of climactic moment where Samuel takes on some agency for himself. What's going on there?
Well, Samuel becomes a prophet as a child when God speaks to him.
Say more.
Well, he kept hearing this voice, and he kept going to Eli, saying, you called me. Eli said, no, I didn't call you. So he go back, and he heard the voice again and again, maybe 3 or 4 times. And Eli finally realized that it was a voice of God talking to Samuel at that time. And that's when Samuel makes the transition from being an understudy of Eli to becoming a prophet. Because God revealed to Samuel the plight of Eli's sons that Eli later asked him to reveal to him, and Samuel did that. So that was the fulfillment of prophecy of Samuel becoming a prophet at that point.
Right. And it's some serious news that he's got to offer, right? It's like this is a crossroads kind of moment for Samuel. Am I going to tell?
I was going to say Eli threatens him.
Right.
To say, you better tell me the truth and tell me exactly what God said to me, because as most of us will be reluctant to share that kind of message with someone who we held in esteem.
I think this has a lot that transfers into how we can understand mentorship and leadership and how God works in and through us. But before I say anything like that, what else is anybody thinking about, either based in that or some other perspective that you're bringing? Think about church life in general, or organizational structure in general. How often do we see leadership models that are, I was going to say restrictive, but that's not what I'm thinking about. It's more like those who have official power kind of breadcrumb.
Micromanage. Some are micromanagers and very controlling and hands-on, and then you have others that are more liberal in their style of leadership, and they allow their tutees or whatever they are, their proteges to develop and be have more freedom to explore what they're capable of doing.
Yeah.
So when you macro manage, you don't have to, dabble in every little detail, and the person can flourish with the student. I think they can flourish better in that with that model of leadership.
Mm-hmm. And I think it takes some intentionality for a leader who already has power to relinquish it, to create or offer the space that is needed for new leaders to flourish into their own. So in the academy, there are, everybody's got an advisor, right? And there are some advisors who use the style of like, you are my legacy because I'm your advisor, you're my legacy, whatever you end up doing is going to reflect back on my name. So you become the kind of scientist, researcher, whatever, that I deem is good, right? Or successful or powerful or whatever, right? And then those little folk come and become little whoever that is, rather than coming into their own academic prowess or research status or whatever.
Yeah,
Sister Janine.
There's some people kind of create a ceiling. They call it a glass ceiling, and I saw it one time in a program I was involved in, where the leader wouldn't even let the other people who also were leaders in specific areas see the reports that people had written. They go directly to this person rather than the people who are working with them every day. And that created, kind of a vacuum of leadership, because she could control control the information, and then everybody would have to come to her rather than to the other leaders below.
Right.
And it did not end well. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, and it does two things, right? It can slow down, it can create stoppages in workflow, just the reality of workflow, and it also creates stoppages in present and future leadership. And this happens a lot in the church, right? This happens a lot in this kind of leadership because there are many folks in church leadership who are so concerned about things being done right, or things being done, a lot of times in the church, we'll use the language of faithfully. But part of it comes down to just this human temptation to hold on to power.
Yeah.
And so there are, there's lots of conversation, and there's so many reasons for it, but this is one of them, that the church is dying, right? And the church needs more young people, and the church, blah, 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 right? But part of the reason that young people are not coming to church, again, there are many reasons, but this is one of them. Part of it is that young people many times are expected to just show up to church, obey the leadership in power, and not have any kind of voice whatsoever. Where there are other spaces in society, in the world, in their communities, in life, where they're able to offer their gifts and be fully participatory in it, right? And so when certain leaders are cutting off that access, it cuts off the potential leadership and potential growth and just even creativity. Sister El, please jump in.
One comment, just that in leadership, the leader also must realize that those that they are mentoring is not to mold this individual to be a replica of themselves. They have to allow them to come into their own, because they may be doing something a little differently than you. However, the end goal is there. And so you have to allow those that you're mentoring to come forth within their own. The only other comment I just want to make, when you see me looking down, I'm not ignoring, I'm monitoring YouTube. So just don't think that, or when I'm typing, it's not that I've tuned out, it's that I'm watching those on YouTube.
Thank you, Sister Yale. I appreciate that. I want to ask you something else. So yes, I mean, I for one agree with what you're saying. And there are a whole bunch of leaders out there using the other model. So not that I'm all about like convincing folks or whatever. I mean, that's a whole thing in and of itself, right? How do we convince those leaders to do it right? Whatever, it is what it is. But like, where do we go from there? Like, these folks think it should be like this. Look, we're trying to carry on. I'm kind of like trying to put myself in their position, right? We're trying to carry on these traditions that are very important. And especially in this world today where everything is everything, and there's so much information out there and everybody's got their own opinion, and then there's Twitter and whatever, right? And not that that's like a diss against social media, but just saying that information is all over the place. And these traditions we have been passing down for thousands of years, not just hundreds of years, thousands of years. And we wish not for these traditions to get lost in the clutter. So one of the ways that we can do this is be very specific about how we train up our leaders so that they can be grounded in the traditions that have held us and our people and our communities for all of this time. Where do we go from there?
Well,
oh, hold on, Sister Janine. Let's have Sister Yale jump in first, and then we'll open it up. No pressure, Sister Yale. Yeah, because you said that thing and you were wonderful about it. So I was like, hey, let's do some more.
I would have to think, how do you do that? I have to give that a little more thought. Someone else can jump in. I don't have the how to. I know that it does exist and it is an issue, but how to overcome that? I can only use myself as an example in that I did not do that. Because I believe in, I try to practice doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I would not want anyone to do that to me, forcing something on me and not allowing me to grow and expand and to come into my own based on the traditions, but come into my own way of doing something. Therefore, I would not do that to someone else. How that translates into making it a practice or a theory or a step 1, 2, 3, I don't know. But you just have to think about the other side of that table and not be so self-absorbed with self.
That's good. That's great. Those are a couple of steps right there. Excellent. Thank you. Sister Janine, come on in.
You know, I try to remember that God loves everybody. And if God loves everybody, then everybody has worth and deserves to be listened to, and you know, and deserves the opportunity to be part of God's world. And you know, this is not easy. This is tough. One little example: Sunday, we had a street. I wasn't here, but we've been having more street people coming into the worship service, and one of them who's been fairly frequently there fell asleep, but he snored really loud, and so he snored for 15 minutes really loud, and then life continues, you know. But it was, you know, funny. That's kind of in a way, kind of a funny thing. But if you think about a street person and where they might have slept or not slept the night before, you know, they might, and the place is cool and comfortable, you know. People fall asleep all the time in church. So
yeah,
I just
right.
remember that.
Right. I mean, all different kind of folk. fall asleep at church. Yeah, so a couple of things. One is, so the language around, I'm assuming you mean somebody who is living without a house, right?
Yeah.
Like sleeping in the street or
Yeah.
outside, or yeah. So
We don't
the term
know.
the term a lot of folks would use today is houselessness, or
Yeah.
like somebody who is houseless or without a house.
Yeah. Right. And I've
rather
forgotten about-
than
Right,
yeah.
right.
So I mean, part of this is switching our language, right?
Right.
So, and part of what that says to me too is that the person felt safe enough to be, you got to feel, you're either totally exhausted and you fall out asleep,
Yeah.
or you have to feel safe enough, at least relatively, to be able to let your guard down enough to go to sleep.
Right.
So in some senses, the church circumstance that you're talking about is at least a safe enough space where somebody felt like they could let their guard down and get some sleep. Now, I think also what you're bringing forward is that there are times when us church folks get so caught up in protocol or whatever else that we forget the realities of people surviving and thriving, and get so caught up in whatever that protocol is that we would hold the protocol over and against someone's well-being. And I think the way I'm hearing it, at least in the midst of this conversation, is that connecting it with Sister EL's comment about leadership, right? Like how do we hold on to tradition, right? Because part of what Eli is doing is countering the tradition of I'm the leader, you are, or I'm the elder, and you are the younger, or you are the mentor, mentee, right? And so whatever I say goes, and you don't counter me, I teach you, right? So part of what Eli is doing is countering that method, that model, and saying, look, I need you to tell me the truth. I need you to tell me the truth. And part of, here's where I think this has a lot of currency for us. Like, not money, but in general, right? I think this has a lot of currency for us because Samuel is being trained to be a prophet. And what are prophets called to do? Prophets are called to go into a spot and be like, hey, I know y'all don't want to hear this, but blah, 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 right? Prophets all the time are getting thrown in wells. They're getting, they're getting tossed over here. They're getting killed. Their head is ending up on a platter. All sorts of stuff are happening to prophets, right? Most of the folk are not digging the prophets. It's just the prophet and God. And the prophet has to go up against everybody. The prophet's safety. The prophet is not getting a lot of accolades, right? So one of the opportunities for Samuel to practice this is by telling Eli the truth. The person who is in charge of raising him and his survival, and perhaps even his thriving, if they even thought about it in language like that back then. Eli is the one that controls everything for Samuel. And what Eli does is Eli uses that power and says, I need you to do this thing that is counter to everything that we know right now. Everything that we know about this relationship, I need you to counter that and interrupt it and do what God is telling you to do. So it provides an opportunity for Samuel to be able to do the thing that Samuel's going to have to do if Samuel's going to live into this call as a prophet. And Eli uses his, what we would call now, institutional power to create the space or the safety for Samuel to be able to practice it against the one person that Samuel might have the most trouble doing it with. Right? How many times are we able to go in and tell truth to power, speak truth to power in different circumstances, right? But when it comes to our family, it's like, nope. Or somebody in a particular position, nope, right? You have like pastors and ministers all over the place who are telling truth to power all over the place, right? Will they say the truth to their bishop? I mean, that's just real talk, right? This is not something where it's just like that employee over there or that child or that mentee over there or whatever. It's everywhere. Everybody's got somebody that they will hesitate, even for half a second. They'll hesitate. It's based in relationship. It's based in risk of status. It's based in risk of vocation, whatever it is, right? Would I have the courage to go to the bishop and say something like explicitly truthful, knowing that the bishop could revoke my ordination, right? There are things in the discipline that talk about, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's like, it's something where you can't directly counter another minister's leadership, something. I can't remember exactly what there's some term for it. It's like, wow, could you be more vague, Michelle? But I'll look it up. This I can look up. But anyway, there's something very specific, right? So if I come and like counter another minister's leadership, and there isn't like some serious backup to like this was so out of control that somebody had to say something, right? The other minister could claim this, whatever this is called, from the discipline, be able to look in the book of discipline and be like, Michelle's out of order. Michelle is out of order for doing this, right? So when it comes to being able to tell truth to power, it's one thing to be able to do it, when you're amongst folks that think like you, right? It's a whole other thing when risk comes into play. So how do we balance risk and responsibility from the side of Samuel? And then how do we balance leadership and faithfulness, true faithfulness, from the perspective of Eli? What are our final thoughts about that? Or something else that's jumping out for you?
Well, I think one thing, you have to be strong in your faith. If you know that God is on your side and you're doing the right thing, you step out on faith. And you might know that there's going to be consequences to be paid, but you know that God has your back. So you do it. Now that's easier said than done.
Yes, ma'am.
But that's true, but it's true. It is really true. It made me think about Liz Cheney. And I never thought too much of her, but I really respect the fact that she had enough courage to go against her party. But I think she may have the last laugh, because when you're right, and I think she was right, and when you're right, God has your back. And in this case, I think that we know God sees all and knows all. He knows what the outcome is going to be, but there's a path we have to go through to get there. And I think she's on that path. But it's people like her who, and I admire her, because she knew she was going to lose her election, but she felt strong enough. Okay, so I'll lose my election, but I still feel like I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah, and part of it, I think regardless of the situation, I think there's something about integrity that people admire. Something about integrity. Now, we're all going to define that in different kinds of ways, and depending on where we fall on any scale of whatever, folks are going to be able to kind of define that based in whatever they believe, right? But there's something about what it takes, Sister Joan, like you're bringing forward, there's something about what it takes to risk what other people aren't willing to risk for the sake of character. So there's something about that. Oh, Brother Don, were you going to jump in? I was just looking at Colin. Oh, was that an itch? Do you want to talk? Come on in, talk about something. I can see what the private group chat is going to look like. Look, whatever you do, during that noontime, if Michelle is there, just don't turn your video off. Don't hit your face. She will call on you. No, I think there's. Go ahead.
I just say I think that when we step out on faith, I think a lot of times instead of like, okay, I have God on my side, we're looking at, well, what are others going to think of me? Are they going to be accepting, or are they going to, outcast me, or, how are they going to feel toward me? Instead of just saying that, right is right, I'm going to step out on this. Where, I think a lot of times we take that step or think about, well, okay, if I say this, how is this person going to perceive it? And depending on how you have them, think of them, do I want to fit into them? I think that happens a lot in church. That, okay, the minister, I want him to perceive me this a certain way, so I'm going to follow and say what I want, or what I think he wants me to, what he wants to hear, instead of being like, okay, I'm going to be up front. This is how I feel. And I think it takes a really dramatic person to say, okay, no matter where the chips fall, this is my truth. I'm going to share it now, and then that opens up dialogue to say, at least I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I think too, in your scenario, the pastor, right? The pastor is in the position of Eli at that point, right? The pastor has a certain amount of power. No matter how we want to talk about it in Protestant churches, the reality is that we do infuse power, into that role, right? So for a pastor to make clear, to make very explicit in multiple ways, because it would have to be in multiple ways, that to do as Eli did, like even if the thing you have to tell me is calling me to the carpet, even if the thing you have to tell me is countering what I've been talking about or what I deeply believe or whatever else, if the pastor is making that perfectly clear, then it does open that space up, right? There's a way that we can use the power that we have, because we have influence over somebody somewhere, right? There are ways that we can utilize that power. I think, Sister El, I think in ways that you're talking about, right? How do we create those spaces where the folks who are being mentored by us, or even just like watching us, right, are feel, not just are free, right? Because we're all free, or we should be, but feel our freedom, right? Feel that freedom to live into who we authentically are. I know we're at 12:59. We're like right at the spot. But I think this conversation can, take us not only through 1 Samuel, but beyond that. I think as we get ready to, well, I'm going to be with y'all tonight, so we can pick up some of this tonight too. But especially as we get to the end of August, this will be our kind of like summer cycle. And then we'll jump back in. We have like a new schedule of ministers and the content coming for September into the end of the year. So thank you all so much for your participation and your wonderful perspectives. I so appreciate being able to have this conversation and this study amongst you. Is there anyone who would be willing to offer a prayer to close our time together?
I'll go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you for all the many blessings that you have bestowed upon each and every one of us. Lord, we want to thank you for the dialogue and talking of your word, creating a better understanding, hearing viewpoints that may be different from our own. But Lord, we just want to make sure that we're uplifting you in a special way. We want to make sure that we're out there doing your bidding so that those that don't know you can see you through us. Lord, just bless each and every one of us on this call. Lord, uplift us. Let us share with each other all the things that we are feeling and experiencing in your word so that we may grow and learn from each other. Lord, We just give you all the praise and honor that you are due. I pray this in all your many blessings upon us. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Brother Don.
Man.
Thank y'all, everybody.
Prayer, though.
I'll
Take
see
care.
some of y'all at 7.
All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Yes, take care.
Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.